And welcome to episode number 124 of The Showrunner. I am Jared Morris, serial podcast host and eternal believer in the power of balancing pride and humility, broadcasting with great enthusiasm today on my feet as I stand in front of my brand new stand-up desk, which I'm very excited about. And here with me, as always, is my co-host, Johnny Naster, drummer of Punk Rock Beats, best-selling author, and the host of the world-renowned Hack the Entrepreneur. We are your podcasting mentors, excited to be with you for another week of talking about not just how to podcast, but more specifically, how to drive meaningful results from a podcast-centered marketing strategy. And this week, we are going to talk about naming your show. And specifically, we're going to go over 3 key concepts that you should consider when coming up with the name for your new show, or if you have a show that just isn't getting the traction that you want, that isn't connecting, then for renaming an existing show. And look, even if you are settled on your name, so you're thinking maybe you should just skip this episode, you shouldn't, because the concepts that we're going to discuss today are applicable to many elements of your show besides just your name. So there will be something for you too. So settle in, turn up the volume, and come along on this week's path toward becoming a better showrunner. And first, let's welcome in Johnny by hitting up the random question generator so that we can learn a little bit more about him. Here we go. All right, Johnny, here is this week's random question. If you could choose your last meal, what would it be?
Tacos.
Wow, that was quick, fast, and decisive. Like tacos from a specific place, any specific type of taco?
No,
like,
good tacos.
Any like Taco Bell tacos?
No. Like, okay. Obviously not, Jared.
Okay, well.
It's my last meal. I want good food.
Taco Bell, not a sponsor of the show.
I like a lot of tacos, and a lot of varieties, but not Taco Bell.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, though, because I live in Texas, which, I mean, like, we love our tacos down here. It's a big thing. So do you have a favorite? Like, and are tacos big in Toronto? Like, when I come up there, should I be?
No, because you're from Texas.
Okay.
If you were from New Hampshire, I would say sure. But my friends just came up from San Diego, and I was just down there a few months ago, and the tacos are amazing, right? And so they just came up here, and I was like, I'm not going to take you for tacos because I think they're pretty good, but you're from San Diego, so they're not that good.
Okay. You love tacos. All right.
Yeah,
so
I do.
That's your last meal. All right.
Well,
I like
hope it's not my last meal, but if it was.
But if you do get to choose your last meal, it'll be
right.
Tacos.
Okay.
It'll be tacos. All right, we got that. So if this is your first time listening to us here on The Showrunner, we want to welcome you. We are glad that you're here. You may find this is not your typical podcast about podcasting, and that is exactly the way that we want it. If you have been with us before, welcome back. We appreciate you being with us again. And frankly, we just hope to be better today than we were the last time. And whether you are a newbie or a grizzled showrunner veteran, if at any point during your journey with us, you decide that you want more, that you want to get serious and take the next step as not just a podcaster, but as a showrunner, we are ready for you. So visit our homepage, showrunner.fm, and drop your email address into the field that you will see right there at the top of the page. That is the best way to stay connected with us and with the show. And if you ever want to contact us directly, you can just hit reply on one of our emails, ask us a question, and as always, we will be happy to answer. And speaking of grizzled showrunner veterans, Johnny, this week we want to shine our showrunner spotlight on the host of a show called On the Schmooze, as well as a new show that I can't wait to listen to called Parent Founders. And just, I think it's appropriate to do this on the week that we're talking about naming your podcast, because I think both of those podcasts are named really, really well. And the showrunner for these shows is Robbie Samuels, and here is the intro to On the Schmooze, so you can meet him real quick.
Welcome to episode 103 of On the Schmooze. Let's do this.
Welcome to On the Schmooze, the podcast that highlights talented people from different fields, explores how they built strong networks, and overcame challenges on their way to becoming successful leaders. Now, here's your host, Robbie Samuels.
This is a first. I'm attending 2 national conferences this month.
So I was already planning on featuring Robbie in this section at some point, and then Johnny, you and I were on a Q&A last week for the positioning course, and Robbie's name came up, and I took that as a sign that we should feature him this week. So I caught up with Robbie to find out how his show running is going, and here's what he told me. Quote, It's been so great to use podcasting to expand and deepen my network. I've had the opportunity to connect with influencers in my field and form relationships that went beyond the interview, being able to offer, I would like to interview you, rather than ask, can I pick your brain? I just interviewed Seth Godin, and that was beyond my wildest dreams when I started working on this show a few years ago. I've published a weekly show for just over 2 years. My first episodes were 000, 001, 002, because I was determined to reach 100 episodes and had the placeholder zeros the entire time, and I reached 100 last month, unquote. So first off, congratulations, Robbie, on that very meaningful milestone, because any of us who have gotten to 100 episodes knows how exciting that is, how much that means. And Johnny, what's interesting about that naming convention, the 000, 001, 002, is that's something you and I have talked about before on the Showrunner, and we talked about it for that exact reason. Using it as much for your audience as for yourself is kind of an aspiration for something to reach. So it's awesome hearing Robbie talk about that and how he used it for that very reason.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. It's just, there it is. Like, there's no question of like, am I going to continue? It's like, well, I'm still at 00. So I something or something that I just need to do it. So congratulations, Robbie. It's a huge, huge milestone.
And Robbie also told me this about his upcoming show. He said, quote, I'm working on a second show, Parent Founders. I'm interviewing parents who invented a product to solve a problem they experienced as parents. Excited about this niche. The name was suggested to me when I was on a Q&A webinar with you and Johnny a while ago, unquote. So there you go. Chuck up another show running to success to our Q&As, but even more so to the incredibly helpful and insightful showrunner community that are there for those Q&As. And by the way, if you know of a great parent invention or a great parent inventor, you can contact Robbie at his website, robbiesamuels.com. I'm sure he'd appreciate the recommendation. That's where you can also listen to his show on the Schmooze, and I'm sure find out information about Parent Founders as well. So Robbie, we are really, really excited about your success, and just keep going, man, because you're doing great things as a showrunner. Johnny, any thoughts on Robbie, tacos, or anything else before we dive into this week's main topic?
Tacos. I don't know. I guess I just really like seeing sort of the formation of shows, like through either emails or in the Facebook or in Q&As, and slowly seeing these like ideas get turned into absolute reality and then like taken to hundreds of episodes. It's brilliant. It's really, really, really cool. And so I thank Robbie and everyone else for sort of following along and also like giving us or sharing with us as you're going through it, and then using advice and bouncing ideas off each other. I think it makes for better shows all around for all of us. And I don't know. It really excites me that we get to do this.
I agree. I mean, it's why we do what we do, because we know how exciting it is to get to 100, and we're both striving to, reach our next milestone. I think with the Assembly Call and Hack the Entrepreneur, we're both now striving to get to episode 500 here on the Showrunner. We're striving to get to episode 200, and those milestones are exciting, and it's just so rewarding to see people like Robbie, as you said, take that idea and go all the way there. So very, very exciting to see. All right, you ready for the main topic?
Absolutely.
All right. Here we go. So, as you surely know, your show's name is vitally important, and I think you would agree with that. We can all rattle off the catchy, memorable names of very successful shows like Revisionist History, Stuff You Should Know, Pod Save America, and on and on. But can a show succeed with a bad name? Well, in the right context, I suppose it can. And in fact, as we are recording this, right now, the #1 show in Apple Podcasts is called The Wilderness. Now, if you didn't know what that podcast was about or who it was by, you might think that this is a show about nature or maybe saving the environment or, I don't know, doomsday prepping. But you probably wouldn't think that it's an audio documentary about the history and future of the Democratic Party in the United States, but it is. And yet this show with kind of the non-specific, non-descriptive name is #1. It already has over 1,500 reviews. And it's produced by Crooked Media, one of the darlings of podcasting, who have built a massive audience that they can launch new shows to that all but guarantee their success. So this show probably could have been called Test Test, and it would have succeeded. So can the name really be that bad? I still say yes, because your show's name has the power to attract the attention of podcast window shoppers who have never heard of you but might be interested in your content. So is someone who doesn't listen to crooked media but is interested in the history of the Democratic Party going to get any sense of what this show is about from a title like The Wilderness? I mean, unless I'm missing something, I don't really think so. So to me, it's a missed opportunity that shouldn't be obscured simply because the show is a success thanks to its powerful launching pad. Now, again, you could argue that the name works because of their crooked media platform, but it doesn't work nearly as well as it could. And you should probably not use it as an example when you're naming your show. Which brings us to the first point that we want to make about naming your show that you always need to keep in mind when you're thinking about naming your show or reconsidering the name of your current show, and that is context is everything. So I can't tell you whether the name of a show is a good one or not simply by hearing the name. What matters is the context. So let's go through a quick example, Johnny. Let me ask you this question. Do you think that this is a good name for a show? The Coach Jeff Garrett Show. Is that a good name for a show?
No.
Why not?
It really doesn't roll off the tongue very well.
No, it doesn't.
Coach Jeff Garrett, the Coach Jeff Garrett Show. Like Jeff Garrett's the coach show. I don't know, something. I don't know who Jeff Garrett is, obviously, but I'm probably not the target audience. But I do like something that, I mean, at least The Wilderness is, it's easy to say. It's easy to remember.
It does have that going for it. That's why
right.
It's not a total disaster.
Right. So I'll say, yeah, I don't know.
Not a fan of that. Now, here's what I would say about a show like that. If Jeff Garrett, whoever this is, if he is well-known and with a large built-in audience, then a name like that could work, right? You know, think about the Dave Ramsey Show. Like, that show works because people know who Dave Ramsey is, you know, and so that's going to attract attention. Even if you're just kind of window shopping, you've probably heard of Dave Ramsey. That will stop you and kind of get your attention, okay? Now, for a guy like, you know, Coach Jeff Garrett, I think it could work better because you might be able to be more descriptive of what the coaching is about. Like, there's ways to be more descriptive of it, which we'll get to in a second. But that name could potentially work depending on what the audience for the name is. But if he is not well known, then that name is pretty much a disaster because, I mean, you're not going to attract much attention with it, and you're not even being descriptive of what the show is about, of what kind of coaching you're going to get. So, point being, the context matters. Like, there's a way for that name to work, and there's also a way for that name to be a disaster, but it's the context that really matters for the name. And so remember that when you're thinking about your name, is you can't just come up with something catchy or something, you know, that's really descriptive and think it's going to work. It all matters about the context, the audience that you're targeting, the goal that you have, the market that you're going to be in. All of that context matters when it comes to your name.
I would also like to say, like, don't fall into the trap of like sort of falling for like survivor bias, right? Because you can see it. You could see a show that might have been somebody who wasn't well known, and now their show is well known, and so it's like, well, that worked for them, and it's like, well, right. But, and there's the one person that we see that it worked for, but we don't see the 12,000 ones that tried before it that didn't work in that way. And so don't use it. Like, listen to what Jared's saying and don't use that as seeing, well, The Wilderness, it works for them, so I can just call it something random. It's like, well, they do have sort of a push behind them that they can use, and sometimes it can just work. I mean, same with bands, right? I mean, think of bands that sometimes are popular, and it's like, that name, if it was just a band playing down the street and you'd never heard of them, you'd be like, wow, that's a terrible name. But now that they're huge, it's kind of like, oh, we just understand that, oh, it's just Nickelback or Pearl Jam. Like, they don't really make any sense. And so sometimes when people are naming things, they can fall into that survivor bias. Well, it worked for them. It's like, right. But don't forget the 10,000 or 10 million in that case that it didn't work for. So don't just think that you're that rare oddity. Use the context and these lessons to give yourself the benefit of the doubt and increase your odds of becoming one of those survivors. And then you can always rename a show later if you wish at that point. Like,
for example, Johnny, you could start a show right now called The John Nastor Show, and it would, you know, you'd be launching to a built-in audience. People know you. It would have a much greater chance of succeeding than if you had named Hack the Entrepreneur The John Nastor Show way back in the day.
Right.
The context. So even, the timing of when you might, make that change or name your show something matters. And what you said about, not falling prey to survivorship bias is a really, really good point. So yeah.
Even to extend that out, though, with my naming of the show, if I would have named it The John Nasser Show, not only did I not do that, I called it Hack the Entrepreneur, but I didn't even put my face on it at first. Because it was like, it's not going to help anybody to see my face at this point.
It would have been wasting valuable space. Now, your mother wouldn't think so, of course, because your face, I'm sure she believes would make everything better.
Exactly, but she can only listen to so many episodes.
Yes.
So so I made it so that it was clear and stood out in the marketplace that was there. And then at 100 episodes, I had a built-in sort of audience at that point. And then I actually added John Nasser to the bottom of it, and I put my face on it.
Yeah. So
but I kind of used it as a leaping off point.
Yeah, and look, we could talk really in depth about context, and there is a lesson in our positioning course about naming, and we really go in depth about context. We can't go full in depth on it in this episode, but this is one really important element of context that you should think about. Okay, for your show, are you launching it, or is it intended for a built-in audience? Because if it is, then your ability to use your name, or a brand name, or some kind of inside joke, or maybe some kind of jargon term, or even a term that you came up with, your ability to do that is going to be better than if you're using your podcast to build an audience from scratch. Because if you're using your podcast to build an audience from scratch and people don't know you, or they don't know your concepts, and there's they don't understand any of the terms that you use or that you might have made up, then you really need to consider putting your usefulness proposition front and center. Okay, and we're going to talk here in just a minute about what your usefulness proposition is, because it is a really, really important component when it comes to naming a show that I think too many people overlook. So we'll talk about that here in just a second. First, if you're listening to the show, there's a chance that you are familiar with our comprehensive podcasting course, the Showrunner podcasting course, which you can find at showrunner.fm. But as I just mentioned, we have another course that we recently launched, and it is all about how to position your podcast so that you can actually get heard, build an audience, and drive meaningful results with your show. It features a comprehensive set of lessons, including the in-depth lesson on how to name your podcast that I just referred to. It includes detailed worksheets, several Q&As with me and Johnny, where we get the chance to answer your questions that are specific to your situation. And the reason why this course is essential and why we put so much time into developing it is that there are 550,000 active podcasts in Apple Podcasts, which is a lot. And all of those shows are a major threat to you building a loyal audience if your show is just like everyone else's. But if you stand out, if you position your show in a smart, strategic way, then the growing number of shows and all of the new podcast listeners they will bring in actually represents an opportunity, not a threat. But you have to get your positioning right, and we want to help you do it. So for details on how you can get started with this course today, go to showrunner.fm/podcast-positioning to learn more about the course and decide if following our path to creating a unique show that cuts through the noise and really gets heard is right for you. It's currently priced under $100, so it's a low-cost investment that can make a major, major difference on whether your show launches or fizzles, or launches, connects with an audience, and delivers big-time results, which we assume is what you want. So again, go to showrunner.fm/podcast-positioning to decide if the course is for you. All right, Johnny, let's continue on with our main topic this week, which is about how to name your podcast so that you can achieve maximum listener attraction. And we talked about the first key concept, which is that context is everything. It makes such a big difference when it comes to naming your show. And the second key concept that I want to talk about is your usefulness proposition. So longtime Showrunner listeners know that the 4 pillars of a remarkable show are authenticity, usefulness, sustainability, and profitability. And when we talk about usefulness, what we mean by that is that people are coming to your podcast for something. All right. They are coming to be educated, they are coming to be entertained, or they are coming to be inspired. Now, if you can do all 3 of those things, awesome. The best shows have a mixture, but the best shows also understand that there is a primary element of usefulness that people are coming to. For instance, with the Showrunner, we know people are coming here for education. So if we can entertain you, if we can inspire you, that's great, but you're coming to learn something about how to be a better podcaster, how to be a showrunner. So we keep that in mind. And you need to keep that in mind with your show. And when you're naming your show, you should keep it in mind as well, because you should strive to have a name that lays this out explicitly or that is at least suggestive of it. So let's go through some examples here so that I can illustrate what I mean. So let's say that your show is meant to educate. Okay, you should have a name that suggests that when people listen to the show, they're going to be educated about whatever that topic is. So history shows are a great example of this. Hardcore History, right? That's a great name. It has a lot of other elements that make it a great name, but it's also obviously descriptive of you're going to learn something about history here. Other shows, the British History Podcast, Stuff You Missed in History Class. Those are great shows that are really suggestive that you're going to learn something. How about entertainment? Shows like The Rewatchables, Myths and Legends, Cabinet of Curiosities, the show that I didn't know existed, but that I just found today when reviewing shows, Poop Culture. If you're going to name your show Poop Culture, chances are you're looking to entertain people more than you're looking to educate or inspire them, right? So it's either explicitly laid out there or your name is suggestive of it. If you're going to inspire, The Tony Robbins Show, that name lays out that it's meant to inspire because you know what Tony Robbins is about, right? School of Greatness. There's actually a show called the Uplifting Content Podcast. So if you want to lay it out right there, you can do that. And that's a top 100 show. So number one, it's about understanding what your usefulness proposition is. That's fundamental. And then number two, as you're considering your name, figuring out a way to work that in that either lays it out explicitly or that at least is suggestive of it so that people, when they're looking, can understand what they're going to get out of this show. That is going to help you attract more of those people who are looking for different shows to listen to, and for you to then get more people who are your prime targets to listen to your show because you have primed them properly with your name. Johnny, your thoughts on the importance of having your usefulness proposition somewhere in your name?
Yeah, so I love the idea, obviously, of educate, entertain, inspire, and striving to have more than one of those elements within your show. And it's interesting because with the examples you used, you can almost sort of tell where the overlap of some of them is. Like, to me, like Hardcore History sounds like, it's educational because it's history, but then the Hardcore History to me kind of makes it like seem like it's like not going to be boring. It's going to be somewhat entertaining because it's an entertaining name. And Stuff You Missed in History Class like doesn't sound stuffy to me. Like, right. It's educational, of course, it's a history class, but it's like entertaining. And then Myths and Legends like sounds entertaining because it's like kind of a light title, but at the same time, it's you're going to learn something. So that's cool. So
that's a good point. So using it to even show the overlap between your usefulness propositions if you have more than one. That's a really good point.
Right. Like with the Cabinet of Curiosities, that's totally it too. Like it just sounds entertaining more, but also it's like, well, there's going to be ideas and things in here that I don't know. And so I'm going to learn stuff. So people who are kind of don't want to just listen to comedy or entertainment would lean towards that. So I like that, but it is essential that you focus on sort of your main proposition and what it is that makes you unique. But then if you can tie in sort of the secondary one that you want, whether that's entertainment or inspiration or education, if you can sort of work that into your title, to me, it's super, super powerful. And so that's my thought.
Yeah. And getting back to something that I mentioned earlier, if you do not have an existing audience, and if you are using a podcast as your primary attraction content, this is absolutely a must. I just don't see any way that you will succeed if you don't do this. So, for example, if you just decided, hey, the number one show is The Wilderness, so I'm going to name my show, I don't know,
The Forest.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, like this works. But it's probably not going to work for you if you don't have Crooked Media's ridiculous subscriber base, right, to launch it to. So if you are using a podcast to attract an audience and you don't have a built-in audience, then you absolutely positively have to find a way to get your usefulness proposition into your name. You just have to. So take an example like 5-Minute Marketing, right? That's a great name for a podcast. And it's a great name for a new podcast to attract an audience because you look at that name and you know exactly what you are getting. And that show immediately stands out and positions itself from the other shows that are out there because it has a name that differentiates it and that clearly states what the usefulness proposition is. It's like, I'm going to learn about marketing and I'm going to learn about it in 5 minutes. Boom, right here. I don't even need to know who's doing the show to at least be intrigued to click through and look at it. And then obviously you need to have a good description and, all the other things that are there. But that's what you want to be thinking about with your name. Again, takes us back to context matters. So you got to understand who it's for. You got to understand where you are in the audience building process and make sure that that informs your strategy for your name. Okay. So, Johnny, any other examples come to mind of shows that you think do this really, really well? Or maybe even other ways to coach people on how to work this usefulness proposition in?
Examples off the top of my head of things like that could be sort of run by anyone is the 5-minute marketing is there, right? There's some other ones at the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of what they are. And it's funny because they're usually based around either a Q&A show or something short. Like it's almost like it's telling you the duration of the show within the title. So that like this isn't like you don't have to settle down for 2 hours to take this in. And some of them you kind of get that feeling with. So I love the idea of erring on the side of the fact that you don't have a built-in audience. Even if you have a small one, I would err on the side of making it something that will differentiate you without you being the center. Unless, of course, you're Tony Robbins or you're Gary Vaynerchuk or something, then of course use that. But otherwise, I really don't see a negative to doing this because if you do it right, it puts you in front of those 500, not 500. It puts you at the forefront of those 550,000 other podcasts on Apple Podcasts. And it puts you in front of a massive, massive audience of people all the time searching for shows. And so it's imperative that you do it. And if I was looking for a marketing show, 5-minute marketing I would give it 5 minutes. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah, exactly. All right. So we've talked about how context is everything. We've talked about the importance of considering your usefulness proposition. Third key concept this week is to understand what your biggest differentiator is and try to work that into your name, okay? Because your name is going to help position you whether you want it to or not. Like your name is positioning you, all right? It is inevitable because it's going to be one of the first things that people see or hear about your show, and they are going to keep coming into contact with it for as long as they're subscribed or for as long as they keep hearing about you on other shows, or as long as you keep showing up when they browse. So your name is such an important touch point and communicates so much in just a few words, okay? And so when you think about that, and when you think about the power that it has on your positioning, and when you think about the fact that there are all those other shows out there, and that your work is not done just getting someone to listen to your show and getting someone to subscribe to your show. You've got to get someone to listen to your show. So yeah, it's great to go from the 550,000 to then being one of the 30 or 50 or 60 shows that people subscribe to. But then how do you become one of the 5, 6, or 7 that they listen to every single week, every time it comes up, right? Well, this is where what makes you different is so important and is going to be one of the most important elements that gets your show listened to. And that's why it needs to be in your name, because it can be that constant reinforcement even after people have subscribed for why they should continue listening. So understand what your biggest differentiator is. And here are a few questions to kind of help you along this path. So is your biggest differentiator who you are? Well, if it is, then your name should probably be in your title, like the Gary V audio experience, as Johnny just mentioned, the Dave Ramsey show. If that's your biggest differentiator because you've built such an amazing, powerful personal brand, then put that in your show's name. All right, but for most of us, that's not going to be the case. So the next question to ask yourself is it your brand? And if it is, then build your show around your brand. That's what Pat Flynn did when he started the Smart Passive Income podcast. His brand was a big thing, and he could launch it with that brand, and it worked. And there have been, many other shows that are like that. All right. Is it your target audience? If it is, use that in your name. And I've seen a lot of shows who have done this very well. Like, for instance, the Life Coach School podcast. Is there any question who that show is for? It is a podcast for life coaches. And so if you want to be a life coach and be a better life coach, you're going to look at that, hey, the Life Coach School. Okay. That differentiates that show, okay, from other coaching podcasts. Because this is about, okay, this is, for people who want to be life coaches, this is the show. The next question, is it your format? Right? If it is, then that should be in there, like 5-minute marketing. The format of that show is a big differentiator. The assembly call. That's why we named it the assembly call. Was, number one, it kind of has a little catchy play on words from the arena Indiana plays in, but also this idea of calls because we took calls when the show first started. So we wanted that kind of suggestion of the format to be in there because it was our differentiator from what all the other content out there was doing. Is it your unique approach to a common topic? Right? The Doctor's Pharmacy is a show that does this, where pharmacy is spelled with an F instead of a PH because it's a doctor talking about how we can use, better methods for growing food to actually help keep us healthy. I actually think Hack the Entrepreneur falls into this category, Johnny, because you had a unique approach to interviewing entrepreneurs. And so I think that fits in there. So, and there are other questions, obviously, that you can ask yourself to figure this out. But the key point here is understand what your biggest differentiator is and figure out a way to combine that with your usefulness proposition. And if you can do that and get it into your name, you are going to be on the right path for a name that will work, not just if you have a big built-in audience, but also as a name that maximizes attraction because people get a really good sense just from the name of what you're about, what they're going to get for your show, and why it might be a little bit different, which is what you have to do in this day and age to get listened to, and then for people to keep listening after they subscribe.
So the one thing I would want to mention, and I feel like a broken record because I always chime in with this, is like sort of search intent and people that are your audience and what will they be looking for? Like, to me, calling your show like The Doctor's Pharmacy and spelling a common word incorrectly or differently doesn't help you at all get found ever. Because unless somebody mistypes it, and unless you have in that built-in audience, but like think about it, like calling your show the Gary V Audio Experience makes sense because somebody goes into Apple Podcasts, they type in Gary V, and they find his show right away. Perfect. They type in passive income because it's a huge search term, and they find the Smart Passive Income Podcast, which builds up his brand. I mean, he was super smart when he named it at the beginning, right? If you're just like looking for life coaching stuff, or you are a life coach and you want to know about life coaching, I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, to me, it's like you need to focus on the differentiator, but at the same time, like, don't try and be so unique that it doesn't make any sense in or out of context, because sometimes you don't even have a chance to set the context yet, or the context is the fact that the person has never heard of you. And there's literally millions of people every single day typing in things into Apple Podcasts trying to find a new show. And so it's like they need to at least be able to find you and get you onto that first list that they can scroll through and then have your name stand out and they'll be like, yes, I want to try this one out. So to me, these successful shows have placed themselves around, again, it's sort of like a third sort of prong of the naming, right? Is like putting in sort of what makes you unique, putting in what like the show is about, one of the three elements or two of the three elements, and then also fit it into something that people would actually possibly look for.
Yeah.
That gets hard when you start making up words. I really truly do find that it's a common thing that just falls into, I mean, if you're writing a blog post and you want it to get found, don't make up a word for titles, because it's just, you're never going to get found. And so although it's not the main focus, I think that if you can go through these three sort of steps and have that sort of in the back of your mind so that you're not totally disregarding it, is super useful. I mean, I didn't totally like the name Hack the Entrepreneur because I don't like the whole hacking thing necessarily, but I knew it was a great name in the fact that it fit these three elements. But then also, Entrepreneur Podcast is a massive search term, and it's right in my name. That helps me a lot.
Yeah, it does.
It has for years, and it will continue into the future. So to me, it's worth at least keeping that in the back of your head as you go through this, and thinking of fitting it in within that context.
It's probably worth keeping, I mean, not even in the back of your head, but even up more to the forefront. I mean, I think that's great advice. And I agree with you in most cases. Like when I hosted when I had the Primility show. That's a total made up word. No one was looking for no one's looking for a word that's made up. So you're right. I do think. Look, I think there is science to this, and then I think there's also art to it. And I do think you should be thinking about search, and you should be thinking about what people search for. I do think then there are gray areas. Like, for instance, I think that show, The Doctor's Pharmacy, I think that's a little bit of a gray area, because I do think that there are other places, like in the back half of his title, if he uses, and he doesn't, but, if he were to use that a little bit smarter and put keywords in his description, because the reason I clicked on that, I was like, Doctor's Pharmacy with an F, interesting. Like it did stand out. So you do there, this is the tricky part sometimes about positioning and being different. Sometimes the things that make you a little bit different aren't necessarily going to be the things that people search for, that they know to search for, but they can be the things that get you noticed if the rest of what you're doing is applicable enough and common enough that people would search to at least get you on the screen. So I think that's what you have to understand. Like, are you going to be in front of them to make a choice? Okay, then now you want to do something a little bit different. And that's kind of where the art comes into it. So I agree with you that needs to be a consideration, and probably a primary consideration. But just know that there's also a little, you've got a little bit of freedom in there to, to try something and to be bold and to, put your own little spin on it. You just have to make sure that you're at least showing up on the screen to have a chance to get picked in the first place.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's review real quick what we talked about today. Again, our topic had a name your podcast that you achieve maximum attraction. Number one, context is everything. Number two, work your usefulness proposition in as much as you can. And certainly if you don't understand what your usefulness proposition is, that is a fundamental thing that you really need to know about your show. And then consider highlighting your biggest differentiator. And then, to add on to that, as Johnny mentioned, think about search and think about the kinds of things that people are going to be looking for, so that you can make sure that you even give yourself a chance in the first place to be found. Because sometimes if you're too cute, if you're too unique, if you're too just kind of out there, you won't even give yourself a chance to be found in the first place. So it's something that's also very important to think about when coming up with your name. Johnny, any final thoughts on today's topic before we wrap up?
No, this is great. I love this topic. And I think this is something a topic we want to revisit, right, in the full course.
Totally.
And because it's been a year and a half or 2 years since we did within that course. So this is cool. I love the conversation about it. And obviously anybody listening, if you have anything else any thoughts or feelings about it or questions, by all means, track us down on Facebook or Twitter or email. It would be interesting to hear other people's perspectives, because as you talk about it, because it is what makes you unique, there's also unique perspectives and ways to look at all of this. And it's just about really having it in your mind at all times, and really having the listener you're looking for in your mind and how they're going to perceive your show when they first get to experience it or see it.
Yep. All righty. Well, thank you for joining us for another week of talking about how to drive meaningful results from a podcast-centered marketing strategy. If you want more from us, if you want to join one of our courses, if you want to view our show archive, if you want to get on our email list, we are ready for you. Visit showrunner.fm and you will find what you're looking for. We will be back with another brand new episode next week. We hope that you will be here with us. Until then, be authentic, be useful, and keep showing up. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right.
That's cool. I like that.
My legs are getting kind of tired now that I've been standing.
I know you're going to
take 2.5 hours. Sure. I got to get a pad and some better shoes, but
you have shoes on?
Oh yeah. Definitely wearing shoes. Totally. Yeah. I have to move around.
Definitely takes getting used to. Is it one that goes up and down?
Awesome. Yeah, it goes up and down. So now I can put it down and sit and like actually post the show.
That's awesome.
You'll notice I changed my background
because raise it up.
Well, at the because the old background I had that whiteboard, but the way that it's situated, like the whiteboard was down at my shoulders, so it looked really awkward, and that thing's like nailed into the wall, so I didn't want to move it. And this one actually it worked a little bit better because now I can get the two pictures on either side, and so I think it actually fits a little bit better. So I'm excited. It was a good gift choice by my wife for my birthday.
Yeah, it's cool.
So,
and happy belated birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I missed that.
One of these days, we're just going to have to get together on July 13th and do a
Yeah, really.
birthday.
That would make the most sense.
It would. It would. If anybody is still listening and wants to ask a question, feel free. Otherwise, yeah, I have to say, like, this lesson in the positioning course was, let me make sure I really think this. Yeah, it was probably the most fun I had putting any of the lessons together. It's a fun topic. So, so Bob has a question. There's a podcast named Gimlet, a podcast that is the name of a drink. Gimlet Media is the award-winning narrative podcast company that aims to help listeners. Yeah. So Gimlet, do they actually have a podcast named that, or that's the name of like Gimlet Media?
There's a podcast named Gimlet.
Because when you listen to Startup, like the first season of Startup was about the beginning of Gimlet Media.
Yeah.
And I don't remember. It's funny that Bob mentions that, though. I don't remember the exact reason why they said they named it that, but I remember thinking, I'm not really a huge fan of that name, but it's worked. But again, part of the reason why it has worked is, well, I mean, number one, Alex Bloomberg is awesome. That's the main reason why it's worked. But they also had pushes that other and abilities and a platform that not a lot of other people have,
and $15 million in funding.
Yeah, so there's some extenuating circumstances there, and I think that's why the point that you made about not falling prey to survivorship bias is so important. I think as showrunners, most of us who are starting from nothing or next to nothing, we should not even take anything from those examples. They don't help at all. You want to look from a show that started with nothing. They hired a company to come up with the name. Yeah,
right.
I mean, you're going to if you have enough to hire a company to come up with a name.
Exactly. Like, interestingly enough, though, with Gimlet, right now they have shows that like the names are way more vague. But as you said, like the first show was Startup. Like that's
a great name. That was a great name for a show.
Exactly it. Like, and that's a search term. That's everything. That just makes the artwork stand out. It's so bold and simple, and it's like you instantly know what it is.
Yep.
And then it actually was like way, way, way above what anyone expected it to be even. But I don't think they would have called their first show something like The Habitat or, you know what I mean? Or Homecoming like they have now. But they can do that now because they have the platform.
Yep.
And so, again, it's context.
And because they have the platform, they are going to be on the page no matter what. Like they're going to be in the top 50 when they launch that show, and they're going to have other shows to launch them. So, that's where kind of an obscure name like that can sometimes work. And that's, again, is where context means everything. So, All right. Good question, Bob. Thank you for that. All right. Let's close up. Awesome to see you all here. We'll be back same time, same place next week, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Sounds good. We will talk to you then, everybody.
Take care.
Okay. Oh.